Stay right there. What are you waiting for? Kill him! Kill them both! No, wait a minute. Is it money you're after? I'll give you as much as you want.
May the saints forgive you, because I won't.
What's up, Tsotchke?
Jin, it's so wonderful to see you again in this context. Coming on Threshold Saints is always a big privilege for me and something I really enjoy. Your audience is always so responsive, and everyone's always very interested in learning new things, making new discussions, putting together pieces and connecting the dots. And you've really provided a platform that benefits not only the listeners, but also the speakers. It gives us an opportunity to link up with each other and be part of a growing community of people who see beyond the veil to whatever degree they're capable of, especially given how things have been for me lately, getting to take off my science hat and put my fez back on and resume the role of mystic. It's a wonderful opportunity for me. So I'm very grateful that you're having me back on the show.
Well, as my invitation was legit, as the kids say, and you really were always welcome. As of course, I really appreciate that. Thank you so much, Tsotchke. I think what I especially loved about your episode and about just you as a Twitter personality and as like a person is that you are able to not only be a teacher, not only embody that quality, which is very difficult, and it's not, especially relating and articulating very dense, both scientific and metaphysical concepts, because those are very much interrelated things, as you spoke about the first time. So if anyone has not heard that episode, it was, I would say, one of my personal favorite episodes. And I like all my episodes, and I've liked all the people that have come on, obviously. But for me, it was a transformational episode because I thought, wow, if Tsotchke thinks I can talk about this, and maybe not as well as you, because I don't have a Hebrew language background innately, so it puts me a little bit at disadvantage. But if I can go toe-to-toe a little bit, right, in small portion with you, at least I know I can do it with people who are maybe not your equal. It gave me a lot of confidence. It built like a foundation for me to go speak on more esoteric, more dense metaphysical topics. And then also I've read a lot of the books that you have discussed on your own timeline in terms of science, in terms of time, space, in terms of like philosophy of mathematics, things that I would never have touched on my own. So for me, it's been like, oh, I actually can approach math. I can actually approach these harder sciences that wouldn't normally be my inclination. So in some ways, it was a fundamental transformation of my consciousness since you came on all those months ago. So thank you so much, Tsotchke, and thank you for returning.
Honestly, that's very inspiring. I have been paying attention to your reading group and some of the outreach you've been doing and your book studies. And honestly, like if I had any role to play whatsoever in that transformation for you, I'm truly grateful because I think you're doing really valuable stuff and elucidating a lot of really complex, difficult concepts, and doing so in a context that in my opinion, illuminates rather than obfuscates, and brings a lot of light to some very obscure matters. I think the matter-of-fact way that you approach these concepts, in coming from the point of view of someone who is familiar with esoteric symbolic systems, but also just sort of cultural generative vehicles. So truly, I'm very grateful to have even been able to be on the show in the first place, let alone to have made such an impact on you. So honestly, that's a really fantastic gift that you've given me, that gratitude.
Thank you so much, Tsotchke. And you are one of my most requested returning guests, so by far. So I've had a couple, but you're definitely probably number one. So I'm really glad that we can make this happen. And I want to ask you about your current projects as much as you want to discuss them, because I think what has happened for you since the first time you came has been a sort of transformation in your social media presence.
Yeah, it's very difficult to speak about, actually, because things happened so suddenly. There was a sort of a build-up, really starting around the time of my appearance on the show. Really, I started to see positive trickling in, mostly your listeners and people from the greater community and stuff like that. But then when I had already been doing some scientific outreach and stuff like that online prior to that, but most people maybe knew me as like a critic of some sort of contemporary practices in machine learning or something like that. And maybe some people who were more observant started to think more about my particle physics work and my relationship to the community as a whole. But yeah, recently, as everyone knows, I am a musician, and I play in the band Glass Classic. We, at the time that we recorded last, we had just been working on our EP, which ended up taking us much, much longer, many more months than we had anticipated. But as of now, so the recording of this episode is taking place on December 23rd, the last day of Saturnalia, I think, or it's the 21st. I think it's the last day of Saturnalia. We've finally finished mixing the release for the Seventh Moon EP, which will be available on Spotify, hopefully around the time that this episode drops. It should be available before Christmas. So that is very positive that we were able to get to that point with the music. But then independently from my artistic output, recently we had a big impact in social media because of some very public positions I've been taking about the necessity and applicability of near-term quantum computing in our day and age, given the current conditions of the market and the state of development of the art. So that started a social movement of some kind, which is centered around my person and around my research. And so now we have a very strong organic community centered around Tsotchke, both as a concept for a corporation, but also as a unit of currency. We have a very reliable, albeit somewhat volatile, asset that we're managing under the token named $Tsotchke. And it's very much a project that represents my own interest in cultural regenerative activities, such as education and outreach campaigns related to adoption of technology, but also in terms of igniting sort of the human spirit with regards to the desire for adventure and discovery. And something about this particular concept or this particular project really struck a nerve with people. And as I mentioned, we now have nearly 3,000 people in our Telegram group, which is t.me/TsotchkeCoinOfficial. That's the only Telegram group. Be careful to join that one and not any other one if you wish to get involved. And we have a Tsotchke Coin account, so twitter.com/TsotchkeCoin as the coin account, which as of the recording of this conversation has 3,500 followers. And my own Twitter account has now grown to above 6,300 followers, which, for reference, about 3 weeks ago, I only had about 1,700 followers. It's been a very interesting situation to go from basically relative obscurity on the platform to effectively now being an opinion maker who is capable of shifting the quality of the dialogue and even promoting and provoking conversation all the way up to the very highest people. Elon Musk has been subtweeting me for weeks. Jeff Bezos and I have had very public conversations, which has brought a lot of attention to the project. And because of the nature of the meme coin economy around these sort of Solana blockchain projects, we got an initial really big amount of interest, and we've been using that grassroots community that's been developing around the interest in the asset as a way of promoting all kinds of interesting things, everything from near-term adoption of quantum computing to physics-informed learning systems to just criticisms about the current state of consumer electronics and the sort of nature of big tech in general. It's a very anarchic, decentralized, asymmetrical science movement. We're part of a broader scope called DeSci, which seeks to decentralize science and take it out of the purview of certain hegemonic control structures and repackage it for a more civilian-friendly audience, or at least a development scheme that allows for scientific enterprise to be self-driven, driven by, say, funding pressure or something like that. It's not without its challenges. It's a very difficult thing to do, to manage a community of this magnitude. It's opened us up to a lot of criticism, and it's simultaneously made me something of a internet celebrity. So it's been a really big change in my everyday sort of life, and it's certainly had a major effect on my social media output, to the point that I'm somewhat concerned about the potential future of my account as the project moves forward, because of the association that people have from the project to my particular Twitter accounts. It's possible that my account will become less personal in the future, although Tsotchke Corporation is my company and my enterprise, and it's based around my work. But just the very real concerns of managing a high-valued property that is attracting international attention, that's only going to continue to grow, is not lost on me. And so I'm having to face innumerable new challenges, but we're rising to the occasion. We have something people are very interested in. People are very interested in me and my ideas and even the way I carry myself. And we're trying our best to basically utilize whatever resources we have at our disposal to maximize our output with the least amount of effort and energy spent as possible.
Obviously, if we can provide a path for you, Tsotchke, we will, in my small way, I hope, and wish that for you. Something that you said that I thought was really interesting, because it relates to our previous conversation, was you were talking about this kind of institutional science and its funding, and you spoke a little bit about how that can be considered sort of Tiferatic synthesis, like this institutional science, this layer of science that sort of buffers the public from true understanding or true knowledge. And what you're doing is you're letting it. Would you describe it in that way, or am I totally off with that?
No, you're absolutely correct. And we do have some very fanatical and devoted followers who do read into our enterprise all manner of messianic and religious symbolism. And we don't exactly discourage that kind of thing, but for our marketing purposes, we try to maintain as much as we can as image of serious scientific research, although we are very fun-oriented people and whatnot. But yeah, no, many of our most observant acolytes do see what we're doing as a revelatory practice of some kinds. Some people do read direct Kabbalistic intention into what we're doing, and it would be remiss of me to deny that. There is an aspect to scientific enterprise in general, but specifically this project, which is rooted in practical Kabbalah, and in many ways, we are attempting to remove some of the clipos that are associated with frontier scientific work and dispel some of the controlling and filtrative aspects of just university centralized academic approach to this kind of research. I myself am still associated with universities. I am, in fact, getting a graduate degree in the material that I'm presenting to the general population, but it's just become very apparent to me how many brilliant ideas languish on the shelf forever or are never able to become the sort of socially transformative vehicles that they truly deserve to be, simply because academia does have this sort of, hasten to call it Luciferian bent, but it's a way of dissolving the individual value of a contribution or to a concept by effectively diluting it with other concepts. So universities, the research apparatus normalizes discovery to the point that very major, potentially societally transforming discoveries are often not given requisite attention and given the actual necessary marketing to become major transformative ideas. And in the history of computing, which is a very disruptive technology that has endless esoteric ramifications, a concept of a thinking machine that is literally made of language, that operates on crude metal and mineral hardware, is basically the dream of every esotericist prior to the last century. Even the notion of scrying or automatic writing or anything like this, these are now effortless phenomena that everyone is doing every single day. I think if you were to go back to the Elizabethan era, how many people aside from, say, John Dee would own an obsidian mirror or something like this to gaze into, and now everyone has one that they're just walking around with. So when the screen is off, you're basically looking at a scrying surface of some kind. This technology does have very esoteric ramifications, but for the most part, because there's a magical work taking place with regards to like the titans of the industry and conditioning human beings to base their identities around these products and stuff like this, a lot of because the actual thing that gives them power comes from these qliphothic sort of energy sources, there is obviously resistance to our efforts, because as being that we are the harbingers of the crystal millennium, what we are presenting is inherently anathemical, or at worst antagonistic to the existing system, which relies upon being able to manipulate people, relies upon ignorance, relies upon hatred and misunderstanding. To promote anything other than that, and to do so in such a way that it can be almost clairvoyantly understood by anyone, is, in my opinion, one of the most important works that could ever be performed for the betterment of the human race and for the betterment of the human soul and the reactivation of the human heart and the imagination that anyone could possibly do. So I think while we do have quite an uphill battle ahead of us, as time goes on, if we continue to deliver on the premise that we are in fact unveiling these literally higher dimensional concepts, so we're literally bringing down concepts from Yetzirah, from Beria, and we're bringing them down into this world, into a physical technology that adheres to all of the normal principles of materiality that we're all familiar with. This is a deeply spiritual enterprise that has ramifications in this world and in the next. And there's a direct conceptual but also spiritual relationship between the crystal millennium and this post-temporal era in which the world will become a paradise. So these things that we're doing are like glimmers of the world to come.
Although I think I still am technologically skeptical in some ways, Tsotchke, but I have to say that you have presented it in a way, as I mentioned, that has made me redefine some of my maybe prejudices against what I would have considered transhumanist technologies before 2020 and during. But now I can look at like your project or like other people's project, or some of these more that are clearly decentralized, that are clearly talking about technology that is within so our sphere of influence. Like it's in our direct control. It's our will. It's not some foreign consciousness. It's directly tied to our own in some ways.
Yes, I myself have very mixed opinions about sort of commercial adoption of technology and sort of the impact that has. I think most of the misery that we are living in the world today is a direct result of, say, very immature and irresponsible applications of very disruptive, socially malfeasant technologies like what we see on social media. But social media itself, I think, to indict the idea of connecting people together as something that is inherently negative. I think the problem is that all of the so-called powers that be or forces that conspired to conquer the technological industry, whether you see it as a long story going all the way back to the Industrial Revolution and the Knights Templar and stuff like that, or if you see it on more of a short-term sort of a thing dominated by Silicon Valley and stuff like this, it's very apparent that the motivations of these organizations are self-fulfilling and not at all rooted in the betterment of mankind or in the fulfillment of any sort of divine promise or anything like this, that the human experience should be directly tied to some sort of angelic rejuvenation or regeneration of some kind. I think it's not an accident that almost everything in our society that's sold to us is a weapon of some kind, whether it be food or entertainment or media or anything like that. I think technology has been basically used to shatter the human spirit, and it's now in many ways being offered as an antidote by the very same people that sold us the very same things that are causing all the problems. And that's, I think, why I will always remain a major opponent of, I guess, what you call strong transhumanism. I'm very in favor, however, of the idea of using human will, but also divine understanding to better the human condition in a tangible way. So I'm personally very inspired to wrest control of the apparatus of cultural transformation from the opinion makers and from the people who effectively control the means of production, if you want to use Marxist language, and really put it in the hands of not necessarily everyone, because everyone is a very big group and not everyone is motivated to improve things or anything like that, but to put it in the hands of the individuals who are sufficiently motivated to better themselves and their community and their society through effectively a unification of the rational scientific part of the mind and the irrational sort of spiritual yearning to be outside of this world. And so I would try to differentiate my point of view from strong transhumanism on the basis of my conception of humanity and the meaningfulness of human existence is more in line with just a nominal sort of ascetic or non-material view. So I see the potential disruptive nature of these technologies as making it possible to end this cycle of basically samsaric materialism for billions of individuals by offering an easy pathway towards confrontation with their own existence. I think it's a false promise of this sort of material culture that we can buy our way out of suffering, but potentially transformative social interventions via emergent technologies that are not specifically controlled by whatever apparatus is invested in maintaining this sort of loosh factory that we're all living in right now. I can't see giving the power of next generation computing to humanity for free as anything other than a positive, because this is going to be thrust upon humanity whether it likes it or not. It's just, do you want to see what's inside of the black box, or would you like to just be mystified by it forever? This is antithetical to the concept of cube worship or something like this. It's really the notion of unveiling the inner concept and turning it inside out, basically.
Honestly, Tsotchke, I'm laughing, but I'm so glad that you mentioned about the cube worship, because not that I am not at your level of thinking or understanding, but I think that this is something fundamentally that a lot of people who believe believe themselves to have a more esoteric base of knowledge, they get wrong. They see everything as the black cube to them. It's almost like black cube derangement syndrome.
Cube derangement syndrome. That's very funny.
I'm really glad you said that. I know you are an appreciator of Robert Anton Wilson and his sort of maybe non-Luciferic elements of his project, which was, I think, in some ways at least, to shake the consciousness, the fixed consciousness, the klipa of sleeping society, as if you want to call it that, and then break them out of that, or at least expand the potentiality of what they could eventually understand. I agree with you. I'm bullish on the market, as to borrow my often co-host Monty from the Nice podcast would say, bullish on the future. I feel like I had a conversation with Zach S and the other Zach CK on a upcoming Twyman episode. So it'll air after this one, obviously. But they were, both of them were actually shockingly optimistic, not utopian, but optimistic. And your name came up as being at least he who holds the lamp on the path, like just someone who is at least showing us that there's like a possibility, a potentiality, that it doesn't have to be, the centralization, the sort of authoritarian, autocratic, technocratic, you could say, control, that actually is just one possibility. There's actually multiple. And I think that, so I appreciate that in your way, that you are letting other people see. Because I've always felt like that. I felt like it can be either way. It can be like how we want it to be. Like, do we place it upon, like, through loving kindness, with our will, do we make of it? Or do we let it control us, or let other people control us through the mechanisms of those technologies? But so I feel really edified to hear you say all of this.
Yeah, there are many things to be optimistic about in the future. There are many things to be optimistic about in the present. The moment we're in right now is swollen with possibility. Every second of existence is an opportunity to engage in some deeper level of thinking, as long as, of course, this goes beyond life and death itself, but as long as you're able to think and exist and have a conception in your mind, you're not under anyone's control or anyone's power or anything like this. I think I tend to ascribe a lot more agency to the average person than I think many people do. I have flirted with the NPC meme and stuff like that in the past, but I've simply seen too much evidence that on an individual basis, everyone is actually capable of effectively taking charge of their own destiny, becoming the person that they're meant to be. And it's almost a bodhisattvic sort of way of thinking about it, but in a way everyone is and everyone does. And the whole concept of if you extrapolate this reincarnative cycle to its logical conclusion, it eventually concludes with every single facet of every single being attaining enlightenment or something like this. I consider myself to be someone who has effectively just looked at their life and looked at existence is in as close to a non-subjective manner as possible. For long periods of time, I really was quite divorced from my own existence, to the point that I was almost experiencing myself in the third person, and I really didn't have much optimism or interest in the future. And then through a series of increasingly intense spiritual occasions, and this took place in about 2009, I was effectively given a vision into how things could be. And it's now been many years, almost 16 years since this event, and the information continues to unfold in increasingly higher resolution, and it leads me to making more and more discoveries and more contributions to both science and culture and just the overall discourse and mimetic environment itself. And so at this point, like, I have a lot of confidence in what I'm doing, and a lot of positivity about the impact of my thoughts and my works. I feel it's very necessary to hold myself to an exquisitely high standard, because if I can't live up to my own potential, according to my own understanding, then even if I'm able to make significant contributions in someone else's life or anything, given how slanted meritocratic nature of society is right now, it's easy to score big wins in some areas because the expectations are so low. But frankly, the most important thing is to adhere to my internal moral system, and that requires that I simply don't allow myself to engage in certain kinds of what you might want to call like favorable thinking or something like this. Like I have to hold myself up to an immense amount of scrutiny, and I have to be constantly checking my work to make sure that I'm doing the right thing and that I'm going down the right path and stuff like this, because I don't have somebody else above me who's like checking my work for me, who's telling me that I'm doing the right thing, aside from the message that I have in my heart and the word of the Lord. And so the amount of confidence that I exude and that people are having in me is really a reflection of the veracity of what my work is grounded in. It truly is greater than myself. I'm not trying to be self-effacing or anything, but I think I'm an almost unnecessary component in this entire equation. I'm really trying to make myself as transparent as possible so that whatever it is that I'm working on is what is coming through. Of course, like everyone else in this world, I have physical constraints and I'm a person who occupies space, at least for this moment. When you're hearing this broadcast, I'm probably still alive. But yeah, so I do take it upon myself to adhere to a very high standard. And it's that which enables me to confidently light the way for the world. That isn't to ascribe total perfection to my actions or anything like this. I make a lot of dumb mistakes because at the end of the day, I'm really not that gifted when it comes to especially things like leading a social movement or something like this. I'm really quite out of my depth here, but I think through being genuine, it earns a great amount of goodwill. So even when I make mistakes, people tend to see the best in me. Although I will say that as my sort of celebrity or my star power sort of increases, I'm noticing a proportional amount of negativity and just ire that seems to be directed at me at a volume that, like, up until now, I've never quite experienced. But it is very humbling, and I'm filled with immense gratitude that you all hold me in such high esteem, and I'll continue to do my best.
As Tsotchke, as we spoke about a little pre-recording, is that the earnestness of the Yesodic consciousness that can invite a lot of negative. It's the evil eye, basically. It's the thing that wants to keep you stuck in whatever they think you should be stuck in. As someone who has often been very earnest, maybe overly earnest with my own flaws or like personality or whatever, just trying to be like more transparent, like you said. I understand that sometimes that people can then ascribe negative qualities to those same things that you might think are positive. So even though they are illuminate in the world, help us spread the seeds of knowledge, help us spread the seeds of the hidden light within all things, I think that it also allows people to project themselves onto it, and not in their positive, not in their ideal form, in their worst, most negative form. So I understand exactly what you're saying. I think that it's very difficult. It's not, you're not following a narrative convention, and as someone who tries to also follow their own drumbeat in the world, I also find it sometimes difficult to just be. It's almost like they are speaking of one thing and I'm almost speaking around. I don't even know if we're on the same planet sometimes. That's how I often feel. But I do want you to, since I have you for at least another hour, I I want you to discuss the Crystal Millennium Kingdom and Sailor Moon and some of her Sephirotic connotations or implications, you could even say, and maybe of the other Sailor Scales, simply because the last time this was something that we wanted to speak about, but we didn't really, we filled it. If you could give me a few words, I would really love that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so the it's as I mentioned in the beginning, because I've achieved so much more notoriety recently, many people following me today aren't actually even familiar with sort of the lore or the narrative that I've been building up until this point, which is ironic because this entire project would not have even been possible otherwise. But yeah, for me, the endeavor of what I quite lovingly refer to as the Crystal Millennium is a all-encompassing sort of intellectual and spiritual system related directly to many concepts in Kabbalah or in Lurianic or Hasidic, Kabbalistic sort of ways of thinking, but very much anchored also in a sort of non-dualistic concept of conscious emanation and the idea that we are shards, so to speak, of a single individual conscious entity, and that because of the nature of the clip being that it distorts the eternal light of the Lord coming from the highest realms, and it becomes then lower forms that rather than seeking to return to the light or to create these feedback systems where there's a constant influx of light and love and understanding in these things, they differentiate their existence or their consciousness by the damage that they're able to do in the context of that proliferation of wisdom. The idea of purifying the human soul through effectively acts of loving kindness and achievement of deeper divine knowledge in the world is the main motivation in a lot of my work. So both my creative work with regards to my music and art, but also my mathematical and physical work is really related to the idea of undoing these veils, revealing the hidden light inside so that it can rise up to heaven and become blessings in the world. This idea of transparency in all things is the notion of crystalline consciousness or crystalline lattice. So instead of the ligature between two subjects or two concepts or two individuals or something like this being rooted in some sort of cliphotic inverse or parasitic sort of relationship where instead of, like I mentioned, instead of the light being allowed to propagate and then return back to heaven and become more blessings for the world, these individual existences predicate themselves upon effectively consuming that energy in some negative capacity that allows them to propagate their own existence. Of course, life itself has a consumptive element to it. Everything consumes some other form of energy, whether it's plants who derive electrical energy from photosynthesis, or animals which are vegetarian, or even animals which eat other animals. Everything is consuming energy and making it part of itself. And it's that act of constant consumption which makes life possible. So there is a degree to which the imbalance in this system, this cliphotic sort of imbalance, is a necessary aspect of life, of existence. Like if you were to reveal all of the hidden light simultaneously, it would, but if this process can be done like infinitely slowly, then it can be done in a way that does not cause major disruption to like the divine plan or the concept of existence or something like this. So human beings, being that we are, according to the Torah, really second only to the angels in terms of divinity, but actually greater than the angels because of the concept of free will, and that man was made to be a steward of the planet, which like the angels were actually made to serve man in that sense. Man is specifically commanded by Mosaic law never to worship angels or other powers of heavens. Angels, on the other hand, are commanded to worship the Adam and to serve him. And that's our world, even though it has been twisted and contorted by sin and by this sort of falling away from divinity in some sense, which, as I'm saying, is not necessarily inherently bad. It's just part of material reality. The conditions require that there's a displacement from divinity that requires a contortion of some kind of light into these forms that preserve other more gentle, more effervescent kinds of light. It's just simply a necessary condition of reality that things are. However, because limitation inherently carries with it the notion of value and quality as like attributes that relate directly to it. Limitation in reality could be seen as like a great boon, something that people could strive for, something that we have to overcome collectively. But generally speaking, it's seen as an inherent negative. And as a result, many neurotic, sort of compulsive societal and human social values and behaviors have become the crutch or the coping mechanism by which the necessary material constraints that we all find ourselves in are absolved. It's not unlike the kind of scenario, for example, you might see on a show like Sailor Moon, where people literally maybe are through no fault of their own, but through forces outside of themselves, are quite literally made into monsters. They've become infected by some amount of distorted will, or through pathological hatred of limitation or something like this, or through what they perceive as being a slight against themselves, or just through the very predatory nature of our society in general when you start extrapolating these conditions out in every possible direction, and there isn't a conscious effort at unveiling them. So the idea of effectively purifying the world through chesed, and literally creating a tiferatic framework in which, because any student of Kabbalah knows that the world, Malkus, sits directly under Yesod, which Yesod and Zadik, they are equivalent words. They mean the same thing. And Yesod really is both the foundation of Moon and Mercury. And Yesod sits directly below Tiferes, and Tiferes sits directly below Das, and Das sits directly below Kesser. So if you have a proper balance where all of the faculties of the human soul are oscillating in harmony, like in music, then you have effectively this clear light, this clear path through which light can flow directly from the highest heavens through all of the four worlds directly down into the lowest of the low. And that's what we call a dira more accurately. But the point being that so through the direct application of love as a positive force in our world, and wisdom and understanding, it is possible to purify the human soul collectively and individually. As at last we spoke, I spent some time going into details about the nature of my songwriting and what my lyrics are intended to portray, and how the music is intended to have this cleansing effect. But it's also possible to do so via the concept of the intellect. And that's really where the idea of Chabad really comes from. Chabad really is an acronym. It's not really a word. And it just stands for Chokhmah, which is wisdom, and Bina, which is understanding, and Das, which is, of course, the hidden Sephira, which is only revealed when this unified light of wisdom and understanding are able to flow directly from the highest point of heaven. And that's when the entire world becomes illuminated with wonderful, great things and blessings. By promoting the concept of this crystal millennial time, which will literally be a point which we call the future. Okay, like in our current understanding, we call this thing the future, but what it really is actually a point at which materiality is no longer like a condition that's imposed on existence as like a punitive or limitational condition, but rather materiality becomes the frame in which the romance of the human existence is allowed to take place. So as I was saying about like the clip of the consumptive nature of reality, if it were to be totally revealed, then like the entire collapse of the structure of the entire universe would result in every single thing that we know as being anything would simply cease to exist. So rather than resulting in a total material collapse, we could instead elevate materialism to the point that the necessary limitations now become actually like the highest platform for the expression of true divinity, truly expressing both the mind and heart of the Lord in our world. And many esoteric traditions refer to this as the marriage supper of the Lamb, or the great resurrection, or the world to come, or something like that. But I believe this is a material condition that will be brought about in a reasonably near period, that we as as religious or spiritually minded people, we all yearn for and feel that it's ever present and just on the cusp of our reality. And it is through these efforts to unify the human soul in harmony with this translucent light path through which like all of the human soul can be equally illuminated without imbalance in the faculties. We believe that we can bring about this material transformation in our day and age.
I have so many questions for you, Tsotchke, after that was an incredible response, of course. I had no doubt. But so one thing I want to ask you first, the first thing is, does that light from the highest source to where we can perceive it, does that have a color? And what is that color?
I mean, in physics, white light contains all light. So pure light is diffuse. Everything is moving in every direction and everything is oscillating at every frequency. So the purest of the pure light would be crystalline. It would be not even white. Like it would make the color, it would make white light look like it were imperfect. Because in order to refract that light and have it take every myriad of forms, it has to contain every possible essence of every possible configuration that could ever take place. It's funny because in kind of profane science, there's this idea of beginning point of existence, like the Big Bang or something. And then there are all these emergent properties or something of matter or something like that. But anyone who's versed with modality or anything like that realizes that it's only possible for these individual elements or attributes to exist if they were already effectively present in the whole. And this is where questions of like, does that mean that God is somehow impure or something like this? Again, as we spoke about in the last episode, the ultimate expression of divine light is completely devoid of any kind of imperfection whatsoever. And actually, even in our world, when you have these pathways illuminated, there is no deviation from the unity of the light whatsoever. It's only when the light is refracted through, again, like the connotation of a clip, especially coming from the Middle Ages, if you read like rabbinical and midrashic literature, it has really like negative connotations. But I think it's very important to remember that the quality of essence, it's really predicated by some kind of contortion or some kind of differentiation that makes it possible for one individual existence to be considered separate from something else. So again, there is on a higher level, like on the plane of Yehida, where the entirety of souls exist as one single body, as one single kind of consciousness. That is the unifying field in which like all of us are rooted and all of our existences are descended in some degree. But what makes individual existence so valuable are these minor contortions, which is to say why the higher worlds contain a mixture of concepts. Like it's well known that Yetzirah, for example, the realm of human conscious activity, that contains both good and evil. To the point that some sages say that it's equal parts good and evil. Of course, that's not really the case. It's simply that because Yetzirah represents the of categorical like existence, there must be, if we have modalities on earth which correspond to higher spiritual concepts, and those modalities are like cliphotic or negative or something like that, then that means that the klippa has to have its root in Yetzirah. And it makes sense because even amongst the regular, what people call yeshvish, it's yeshiva English, yeshvish, or Hasidic kind of language, the idea of the yatzer hara, the yatzer is the inclination towards something. So everything has a yatzer to do something. It means to have an inclination or to have a potentiality for doing something. So the yatzer hara, which is actually, it's the evil inclination, but it is present in even the biological systems in the human body. Like the yatzer hara is actually in the human guts. For example, it's responsible for a lot of the actual process of digestion and stuff like this, and other things related to things like reproduction and stuff like that. So the point is, even though it's framed in this ostensibly, it's literally called the evil inclination, and yet if you look at it on a higher level, it's necessary for existence that such a thing is. And of course, the Yetzer Hara has a antithetical called the Yatzer Tov, which is the inclination towards goodness, and which is where the root of benevolence and godliness and righteousness and kindness and all those things are rooted in the inclination towards goodness. But both of those Yetzerim, they are occupations of the human mind as it relates to the human mind and the human body's conception of itself and the world around it. Even those higher spiritual concepts are constrained by lower level materiality, and they find their expression bound to material conditions. This is again why the concept of the Dira B'tachtonim is so important. Many religious people and spiritual types strive to effectively escape from the world in some sense. Gnosticism is really predicated upon the idea of total spiritual divorce from your material existence. However, our prescription is actually to elevate materiality above its current state of low-level negative process into something that more closely aligns with the higher worlds. And that's really considered to be the most important aspect of human existence. If it was all just about going to heaven, you could just die tomorrow. The whole value of being here in the world right now is that we can bring this world a little bit closer to the higher worlds. And when we do, we will accomplish effectively a total material transformation of the world. And this, again, it relates back to the concept of the crystal millennium. It's not lost on me that this seinen anime from 30 years ago contains in it all of these esoteric ideas, and even relates to my own life story and my own identity and things like this. To a degree, it's because of consuming this media as a child. But to quote Socrates, learning is remembering. So I think part of the reason why this material resonates with me so strongly is because of the interior knowledge that I have of the reality of what this series is framing as a narrative device. In fact, has dimensionality which maps directly to my own existence and to the world that we find ourselves in. And I think this is why you see a lot of the same kind of imagery appearing in different anime series and stuff like this. Like, anime is an inherently esoteric art form. All animation really is. It's direct application of human will, film, theater presentation, anything like this. There's always the idea of a theater literally has the name theos in it. It's a place where you evoke gods effectively. Again, part of the mission of myself bringing about the crystal millennium is really the true nature of reality in a way that could be understood by your average person, rather than, say, just great mystics and spiritual heroes of some sort.
That was so well said, Tsotchke. I think I was going to ask you, we were speaking about the sort of the nature of material reality. We'll always have there's an inclination towards good, which is the primary motivation or the prime cause, you could say. But then there's also that inclination to also do evil. And I was thinking of Ray, Sailor Mars, and Sailor Jupiter, and how they both have actually quite fiery personalities.
Evra, really.
But they also show great potential for loving kindness, both of them. Even Gavura, even Sailor Mars, like Gavura, she has that potentiality of, she expresses it a little differently. It's not quite the same as Sailor Jupiter, who's obsessed with justice and all of those qualities. But that can also have its negative. There can also be a negative application of that. So I was just thinking of that example in my mind when you were speaking. But I want to ask you, for the last 15 minutes or whatever, can you describe the relationship between, we'll say, Sailor Mercury and Sailor Moon Serena? I think this is a complicated Kabbalistic idea that doesn't need to be, it shouldn't be complicated, but people find it difficult to understand this relationship between Mercury and the moon that isn't, that, as you said, is inherent and is rectifying of both.
Yeah, I do want to comment that both Mars and Jupiter do embody the qualities of Gevra, which Gevra, most people think of it as severity or fire, effectively. But Gevra is also strength and protection. So it comes from an immense love of justice and concern for the well-being of others, that they have this fiery energy. Whereas, again, like Jupiter has the lightning capabilities, shocking and fire, similar, but especially with, for example, Mercury. So it's interesting that Mercury is associated with water and stuff like this, being that it is generally associated with mutable signs in astrology, and water directly correlates to the concept of wisdom itself. So if you think about it, what you see with Mars and Jupiter, you really see a lot of domination on the left side of the tree, like Gevra and Bina. Whereas with, let's say Venus and Mercury, you tend to see more domination on the right side of the tree, i.e. Chesed and say Chok. Netzach and Hod relate, but the idea that you have these two things in balance. So you have severity coupled with mercy. And then down in the center, you have the princess. And the princess corresponds to the clarity of understanding. So she's the only one who is capable of effectively cleansing and performing these acts of world transformation, although they must be supported by the other elements. This is what it means to have all the faculties of the soul operating in unison. So when these different qualities are activated, so to speak, and they're able to operate according to their own literal sphere of influence, then you are able to have this translucent crystalline transformation. And just to relate now, the idea in esotericism, specifically in Kabbalah, the relationship between Mercury and the moon, we find them both found in the faculty of Yesod. So why is this? So Mercury is probably the single most important element in classical alchemy. It corresponds to transmutation. It also corresponds to the intellect. Quick is another word meaning alive or intelligent or something like this. And Mercury, it's not an accident that in the series, she's the first character basically introduced. You know?
I was just thinking that, Tsotchke.
Yeah, and she is effectively Usagi's best friend, if in fact, in the whole series, effectively, and together they are able to begin performing these cleanses, and they only bring on Gevra in the form of Mars like slightly later. Okay, so it goes to show you that even slightly out of harmony, if you have the faculty that we associate with loving kindness, which is the quality of Chesed. Literally, water is one of the aspects of Chesed, and you unify that with Zadik or Yesod and beauty, Tiferet. You're able to affect massive amounts of stabilizing, unifying harmony throughout all the faculties. And then as if you're dealing with a really chaotic system, first you introduce these elements of water and clarity, righteousness together, you're able to slow down a lot of the initial oscillations. But if you want to stabilize the entire system, you also have to bring in the faculty of Gevra in order to have the ability to actually arrest the writhing, so to speak, the thing that is shaking itself apart. Because much of the negative concepts that occupy the corrupted versions of the faculties of the soul, they correspond to qualities like anger and hostility and stuff like this, and those are directly fed by Gevra. So by having a purified Gevra, you're now able to begin balancing the entire apparatus. So really, it's those two ideas. It's like Hesed without Gevra is weak, and Gevra without Hesed is merciless. So if you have them in unity, then you have true strength, which is effectively the qualities that are supposed to be embodied in any monarch. So what really makes the Moon Princess possible is, and what that means is to have a world that's founded on righteousness. What makes it possible is the unification of these faculties. To a degree, Queen Serenity is a self-existing entity or a self-existing monarch of some kind, but she's really more of a consequence of this unity of expression and harmony of different faculties. And again, to relate this back to the concept of non-dualism, at some level, all of these things represent the same thing. They all come from the same original source, but it's that differentiation that comes via these necessary contortions of the light that give the conditions that enable these independent expressions to exist. And these things can have a pure expression that serves the necessary overall structure of reality and the human soul itself. The human soul is really the vessel that the entire universe is embedded in. By purifying the human soul and coming into a greater understanding of the way that by going out into the world, we're actually going into ourselves. By going inside of ourselves, we're actually going out into the world to a degree. But there's a very insular process through which transformation takes place entirely internally. And it's that internal transformation that actually provokes the external one.
I couldn't agree with you more. I want to end on a question that may upset the fandom, but at your own peril. So in my opinion, and I had a guest on, Mark Vallon, who also posited something very similar to what you said, that there's a kind of running esoterica beneath a lot of Japanese media properties specifically. And as Monty and I have discussed, that is this intentional, or is it just happenstance, coincidence? Some people say facile, superficial. I personally believe that it's deep, it's intentional, it's illuminating if you choose it to be, and it's actually quite accurate. But I want to hear, obviously, what you think.
Yeah, I must agree. I don't think it's an accident. I don't think it's an accident that any great media throughout history contains symbolic or archetypical constructs that directly correlate to deeper hidden or even occult aspects of reality, because what else is there? The shell game that is sold to the general population as everyday secular reality is basically only able to exist as a result of a magical act that takes place over the edifice of this deeper, more fundamental sort of social reality or reality construct, or whatever we find ourselves embedded in. I think that much like all creative people throughout history, the individuals who are responsible for creating this media are dealing with limitation in their own lives and their own self-expression, and mitigating these potential sources of conflict or stress or constraints by going beyond their material capacities. I think what I find so appealing about the medium of anime above basically every other form of visual art or televised media of any kind is really the idea that it represents the direct application of the human imagination to some kind of fairly objective medium. What you are able to do with visual art in terms of combining concepts with presentation cannot be done to this degree in any other medium. And even other forms of animation are limited basically by their own scope and context. For example, Western animation will always be trying to overcome the idea of cartoons being something for children. That having been said, I'm sure you've had guests on that talk about the esoteric reality of Disney animations and stuff like that. But there's a lot of very rich symbology and iconography, even in American animation, like the classic Disney films and stuff like that. But no, I think it's very accurate what is presented in Japanese anime. Evangelion, for example, often gets a lot of flack from some esotericists because of its seemingly superficial adherence to a lot of concepts. But even Evangelion, which is a show intended to basically sell plastic robots to children, has a massive amount of deeper, not even just spiritual information, but commentary about the nature of society itself. And I think the climate in which anime is created and the sort of the Japanese culture, the pressures that led to its existence, and the very real personal risk that many Japanese people take upon themselves by even engaging in that industry, given sort of the value system of Asian culture as a whole and how conservative and production oriented Japanese culture tends to be. Perhaps not always, but it certainly has a reputation. I think that yearning for connection with something greater than oneself, plus the fact that many of these people are very erudite and well learned, and they have access to libraries and probably did okay in school, or at least they spend a lot of time reading or something like that. It gives a platform, as I mentioned, through which no other medium really is capable of even coming close. And I think it's extremely interesting how much magical girl shows and shonen anime and stuff like that, how much deep information they actually contain. And if you read into it a benevolent frame, I think a lot of people, especially in the esoteric community, they tend to see mystical imagery or something in film as being like negative or some sort of proof or something that everything in culture is just inherently demonic or something like this. And I honestly think that's the furthest thing from the truth. I think that if you understand that what we're living in, what we call society, is some sort of aggregation of various calcified sorts of, I don't know if you call them neuroses or coping mechanisms stacked on top of each other because of a refusal to basically confront the underlying premise that dominates reality, that we are in some kind of like moral framework that exists for a reason, and it isn't a random construct, and the material constraints have been chosen very specifically for very particular reasons. And that denial of the constraint, and also the denial of the sort of assumptive process of identifying the justification or means through which such a thing was even allowed to propagate. I think the confrontation with that reality is repulsive to the average person, that they would rather destroy themselves for countless lifetimes rather than simply face what is a very apparent and extremely unavoidable reality, that the material conditions that we find ourselves in are the result of some sort of well-deserved limitation that was placed upon us. And the only true way to overcome it is both to accept it, but also to see the wisdom in it. And I'm very grateful for every second that I spent in this world, because it was not a punitive measure for me. It's an opportunity to come down and share my interests and my existence with other people. And I like to remind everyone I'll try to be here for as long as possible, but when I'm gone, I'm not coming back. We should use the time that we have together wisely, and I think a lot of people do. And I think as time goes on, it will get better. There's always going to be challenges, but I think we'll continue to burn brightly. We're going to continue to inspire people. And I think if we keep it up, and if we continue to deliver on our basic offering of authenticity and unveiling the sort of true spiritual wisdom that's hidden in all things, I think we'll eventually see a snowball effect where life will suddenly begin to feel a lot more magical for your average person. And I'm just grateful for the opportunity to be out in broad daylight and to really breathe in the sunshine, and to do whatever I can to help out as much as possible. And to get as much of my work done as I possibly can before I run out of time. So hopefully I'm able to achieve my goals. Hopefully I'm able to bring about some of this transformation. But even if we're only able to make a small dent, it was still worth it. I've enjoyed being part of all this, as noisy and messy as it is.
That was beautifully said. So everybody heard Tsotchke say that we live in an isekai. So that's not just from me. But please, Tsotchke, please plug all of your socials, your coin, your project, your and your band, of course, anything else. And I will, of course, include it all in the show notes so people can, of course, check you out, follow you, as I highly encourage them to do.
Thank you very much, Jin. And as always, my band, we're on Twitter. We're called Glass Classic. That's _glass_classic_. You can find us on Instagram under the same title. I think by the time this recording comes out, I think our EP will be available. So you can check that out on Spotify. It's called Seventh Moon EP, and it covers a lot of the conversation that we had today. And it's a very entertaining album, and it's the kind of heavy driving rock album that I don't think people have heard for a very long time. And it's definitely something I think everybody should check out. You can follow me on Twitter at Tsotchke. That's also the name of the corporation that we have recently launched. So as of this recording, Tsotchke Corporation is up and running, and we are actively developing consumer level quantum computing solutions that will be available to everyone. We are currently open sourcing all of our materials so that it can be built upon and used by a broader audience and by the developer community as a whole. We are actively involved in scientific literacy and educational efforts. Lately, we've been doing a lot of spaces on my personal account. So I've been very fortunate to have many hundreds of people listening to me live, sometimes even thousands of people coming and listening to my spaces, where mostly we talk a lot about the history of physics and demystifying everything from quantum computing to just everyday technologies, but also various materials and things like that. I'm very active in my research field, and I really enjoy sharing this information with everyone. And you can follow the currency, which, as I identified, is $Tsotchke. The official account for that is at Tsotchke Coin, all one word. And we have a Telegram community that's available, t.me/Tsotchke Coin Official. As I mentioned, that's our only Telegram, so don't be fooled. You can find the coin itself trading on many platforms and many more by the time you hear this recording. It's a very reliable currency. We have a very good community. A lot of very talented people are working with us, and we're releasing content all the time. As I mentioned, regretfully, I may need to be less personal on my account going forwards, but we're coming to some kind of balance that enables me to continue to do the kind of posting that I enjoy, namely posting pictures of Usagi and anime music and stuff like that, in addition to research papers and stuff. We're going to find some way of balancing the two, but I have a fairly considerable audience at this point. I am just figuring things out. I do look forward to hopefully coming back again in the very near future. There, as always, I had so many things that I wanted to talk about, but we have to go with the flow, as it were. We have to go with the Tao. We'll have to leave those for another day, but just to give a preview, I'm very interested in talking a little bit about some material in the Zohar, specifically concerning the relationship between the beginning of the creation of existence as described in the Torah and some of these other concepts we were talking about with regards to the clip. I'll just read since we brought up the concept of Sailor Jupiter a little earlier, I'll just read this line here from Bereshit in the Zohar, where it says, "The glory of God thunders, as is said, who can contemplate the thunder of his might?" That comes from Job 26:14. "This is the side extending from might, emerging therefrom. Alternatively, the God of glory thunders, the right from which left emerges. Hashem over mighty waters, transcendent wisdom, who stands over mighty waters, over the concealed depth emerging therefrom. As is said, your path through mighty waters. That's Psalms 77:20. Here we find the unification of a lot of the things that we spoke about during the section on the Sailor's Senshi. I would also really like to go over the first chapter of Genesis, Bereshit, as we say in Hebrew, in quite detail, because a lot of conversation about Lilith can be understood better in light of the text in the first chapter, as well the sort of illuminational nature of understanding the higher worlds, because it turns out that the foundation for all Lurianic Kabbalah is laid in the first chapter of Genesis, including all of the worlds. And you find out not only how the story of the Lord creating the heavens and the earth in Genesis is actually a true story, at least in so much as the human mind is capable of comprehending knowledge or truth, but also that it discloses the entire system that would later be expounded on in Hasidic thought. So you can find the foundation of all on the very first page of the book of Genesis.
That's an incredible. Thank you so much, Tsotchke. I really appreciate it. And I'll just plug myself is that I am doing a series with Robbie Mark. So I would love to have you back on the Books of Enoch. I'm doing a series on the Books of Enoch, or he's doing it. And so it sounds like it would actually slot perfectly into that sort of train of thinking and that sort of historical appraisal. So you're obviously welcome back when your busy schedule allows. And you always have a place on the show. And thank you so much, and all the blessings for you in the future. And thank you.
Thank you again, Jin. It was always a pleasure, and I look forward to the next time